You don't get paid for information that's already in the price. You get paid for information that's new to the price. So that's why traders are always asking themselves, not just what do I know, but what do I know that other people don't know? And that's why I should trade. So there's this old saying in poker, for example, when you sit down at a poker table, look around and find the fool. If you don't see the fool, it's you, walk away. It's not enough to just enjoy poker and maybe be good at it. You need to be better than the other people you're playing. So similarly in these markets, it's not enough to just know something, have an opinion. You should ask, do I know more than the other people trading here?
My guest today might be one of the most original minds I've ever had on this show. Robin Hanson is an economist at George Mason University, but economist really undersells it. He trained first as a physicist, spent 9 years doing artificial intelligence research for the likes of NASA and Lockheed Martin, and then reinvented himself as a social scientist who models human behavior the way a physicist models particles. Here's why he matters to everyone listening in today. Back in the late 1980s, before most people had even heard about the internet, Robin was already arguing that we should bet on what's true. He helped invent the modern prediction market, and the market-making maths he designed still runs underneath a lot of the platforms being traded on today. He is, quite simply, the intellectual godfather of this entire moment. Kalshi, Polymarket, and everything we're building here with NEXTPredict. But he's also one of the most fascinating thinkers alive on hidden human motives, the economists of a world run by uploaded minds, and even why the universe looks the way it does. So we are going for a wide set of topics here today. Robin, welcome to the show. And let me start simple here today, because a lot of people are still kind of catching up here. In your own words, what actually is a prediction market? And what's the core belief that kept you championing them for nearly 40 years?
A prediction market is just a betting market, which is a kind of financial market. So financial markets, where you can speculate, have many functions, but one of their key functions is they aggregate information well. And that was the hope that I started with almost 40 years ago, that we could aggregate information better on key topics that matter. So the context was that I was part of a group trying to invent the World Wide Web, which did happen. And the dream for that was that it would make criticism easier to find, and then that would make conversation work better. And so while working on that, I started to have doubts. I wonder if merely making criticism easier to find would, in fact, improve our conversation that much. And so I wondered, well, what else could do it? And then I thought, well, how about if we just had betting markets on a lot of the topics we argue about? Couldn't that aggregate information better so that we had an honest consensus we could defer to on those topics?
Right, and that is really the key difference, say, between a poll, for example, and a functioning prediction markets is the kind of money as the conduit or the medium, right? Without that medium, without money being involved in a prediction market, the whole concept of kind of finding the truth, it kind of falls apart. Is that true?
Well, there are prediction markets that aren't using ordinary money. They use some sort of play money, but it needs to be some sort of money that participants care about so that they can be on a leaderboard or gain respect of a community. The idea is that there's something you exchange when you make bets, and that if you win your bets, you will get that something.
Brilliant, Robin. I want to move to the moment that we're in right now, because here's what gets me. You've been pushing this idea since the late 80s, and for decades, this kind of flew under the radar. But then, more or less overnight, prediction markets are everywhere, doing billions in turnover. So the obvious question is, after nearly 40 years in kind of the wilderness, if you will, why are they having the moment right now? What was the, in your opinion, the cause of this big boom that we're seeing currently through Kalshi and Polymarket, for example?
The proximate cause was a regulatory change. It happened in one particular country when one particular regulator changed their rules.
Still, given that, even before the presidential election, you obviously saw this big boom that prediction market brought through media, right? I would personally, been following the space for a long time as well, say that 2020, the election cycle kind of moved away from trusting the polls, which kind of failed the election cycle in 2016, where Trump beat Hillary, where all the pollsters were arguing for a landslide for Hillary, right? And 2020, media, certainly on the right, started quoting Polymarket in that case. And then 2024, of course, this was another big moment for the industry. I mean, even before the CFTC changed course in that regard, it still felt like the prediction markets were on an up-course trajectory. Is that your feeling as well?
The 2024 presidential election was after the key regulatory change. That's why you saw so many betting markets on that then.
Yeah, so Kalshi obviously got the go-ahead just before the election itself,
yes.
Right, Robin? But you still had a pretty significant movement before that took place as well.
There was this thing called Polymarket, which was not as dependent on regulation, and it was dependent on crypto. And there were a number of crypto attempts to make prediction markets for the decade prior to that, but Polymarket managed to get traction in some way that I guess it's less clear, but it's just about, from a distance, you might think ideas just often just need different people to try them in different ways, and eventually somebody gets traction.
Yeah, brilliant. And if you think about the kind of future of the space, currently what we see in media is obviously a big movement towards Kalshi and Polymarkets. Kalshi in its own right is something like 90% of liquidity, 80-90% is on the sports side of things. But I know obviously you have a bigger vision for what's to come in the future, as for the future of the prediction market space. Can you talk a little bit more what you see as the future of the space and the kind of theory that you have behind things?
So as I said, these speculative markets do a remarkable job of aggregating information, but they usually haven't had that as the customer. So that's been a side effect. So for many centuries, financial markets, the main customer has been the trader. The trader is either trading for fun and excitement or for risk hedging and transfer. And that's been the nature of financial markets for a long time. And most regulators said that's the rationale, and you wouldn't allow prediction markets basically because they said, we don't see how you get enough risk hedging here from these markets. But what I hope for is that the power of these markets to aggregate information can make customers pay for markets, particularly to get the information. And then we could focus more on the markets that were more informationally valuable. And I'd say the world collectively has enormous demand for better information, far more actually than the demand there is for risk hedging or entertainment through the markets. So I see this eventual demand as much larger than all current financial markets, much less current prediction markets. So I see the current prediction markets as still tapping only a small fraction of what they could eventually get to. But they are bigger than they were before, and that's good. It's lowering infrastructure costs, creating legal precedents, getting customers familiar. All of that will help for the information markets that I'd like to produce later, but that we're not there yet. At the moment, pretty much all the customers of Kalshi and Polymarket are the people who trade, not the people who get the information from these markets. You can go and look at the prices and you can just get the information, and many people do. Analysts of the world, many financial market traders look at these markets and use the prices, but they're not paying for them.
Can you dive deeper a little bit on the decision markets that you talk about? So essentially, in your view, this is not about trading to become profitable, let's say, as a trader, as the thing in the future, but rather to help companies, entities, or even government, perhaps, to make better decisions. Talk more about this concept.
So when I first got into prediction markets, I was imagining aggregating information on the usual sort of things in public conversation, because that's what we were imagining when we focused on the World Wide Web. And so ever since then, when other people have entered prediction markets, that's their first thought too. We will have markets on topics in politics, public policy, things in the news. And those are topics on which more information is valuable. But standard decision theory says the value of information is actually helping you to make better decisions. And when I realized that a few years later, I realized that the most valuable markets would therefore be markets that sit right next to a decision, directly advising that decision. So an example is, for many decades, we've had markets in US presidential elections estimating for each candidate what's the chance they will win the election, but also what's the chance they will be nominated by their party. The ratio of those two probabilities is the chance of winning if nominated, because you don't win if you're not nominated. And that's advice to the party about who to nominate. So that's a decision market. It's a market estimate that sits right next to a decision, directly advising the decision maker about if they take particular choices, what are the consequences that they care about estimated for that decision. So we can go through many other examples, but that's a specific concrete example of a decision market. And now if you think about all the people and organizations making decisions all the time in the world, they make a great many decisions that are not that well informed. And having better estimates of the consequence of their decisions could just make a large part of the world better off.
Right. So to your example, that when there is the primaries happening in the US, you might have a X amount of candidates on the Republican and the Democratic side, but the winner in any given party might not be the favorite within that party to actually win the presidency. There might be another candidate within the field who might have better odds of actually taking the presidential nomination eventually. So to the point here, the party itself or the electorate should be aware then in that case of who has the best odds of actually winning the presidency in that case. If we delve deeper into that, I can also imagine that this would be a good kind of information to have for individual organizations as well, let's say, for how to take decisions. But what about liquidity? Isn't that the issue when you get into the kind of tail in these type of markets?
In the markets that have information as a side effect, it's a side effect of the activity in the market, and that activity is created by other reasons. So for the vast majority of topics you might want information on, there is no market because other people haven't found it in their interest to trade that thing. So but when other people trade something more, they put more effort into trading and there's more information, and then you get more information when you look at the price. So in a world where we are just waiting for traders to find their reasons to trading on something, we have a very limited range of topics under which there's price information to advise decisions. But if we flip and say the customer is the person who wants the information, now what we'll ask for them is payment that creates liquidity. So we will take their money and use it to subsidize market makers on a market. And then that will attract traders who want to profit by trading against the market maker. And then they will contribute the information so that the price has the information you want. So this is a way of matching buyers and sellers of information. The buyers are someone making a decision. They pay to subsidize a market maker. The sellers of information are people who could learn about the topic or perhaps already know about the topic. And they need to be induced to bother to trade about it and to learn their information. And the market then is finding a price in the middle between the value that the decision maker places on the information and the cost that the trader would have to incur in order to supply the information. And as usual, markets are trying to find cases where the value is higher than the cost with a price in between.
But let's say, for example, any given organization who would like to have that type of information would need to subsidize essentially the market in order to, in a way, buy that information from and get that kind of source for truth from the wisdom of the crowds, let's say. That is the
right. Now, there's a problem here. If there's a piece of information that many people want, then each of them might want a free ride and let other people pay for it. So even though many people might want information on politics because so many people are interested in politics, they may each rather other people pay, and therefore not very many people are willing to actually pay for the information, even though they value it. So the most promising applications here are therefore is there information that only one party wants and nobody else cares about. In which case, if you don't pay for it, it's not going to happen, and you better pony up if you want it.
You've also talked about this concept that this can be very helpful to governments, for example, to take better decisions. So it works on the same principle, I can imagine. Can you delve a little bit deeper into your theory?
So just to be clear, governments are not usually the first mover in innovation in most areas. So the scenario we imagine is that smaller private actors first get value from this and get a habit of using it. And then word spreads that it's valuable, and then more other private actors start using it, and then it starts to be used at larger and larger scales, and then governments start to use it. So, but in order to make clear how far we could go with this, I would point you to, yes, our government decisions, which are often done quite badly, and that we could then use these markets as better ways to aggregate information about what the government should do. So, for example, there's the Fed agency who manages monetary policy, and they make key monetary decisions, and we could have markets instead make those key monetary decisions or advise directly if what the consequence on average of raising interest rates or lowering interest rates would be. If, say, the government is thinking of having an antitrust action to break up some large company, like once they considered breaking up Microsoft, or they might consider breaking up Google, we could have markets estimating the consequence for the industry of that sort of action and give the government officials advice, therefore, about which way to go with that. You could even have advice about military actions and the likely consequences. For example, before this recent Trump venture into Iran, we might have had markets saying, how will that go on average? And is this a good idea?
That's a good example, I think. Say, for example, now a popular prediction market is will the Strait of Hormuz open for normal traffic by the end of the year, for example. That can give us a guidance stick of where the war is heading. But in order for the wisdom of the crowds to really work, you need a diverse set of perspectives, right? It's even if you have a large...
Not true. No.
Okay. Because even if you have a large number of people with the same perspective, doesn't that kind of move the needle?
So think again about the price and the value and the cost. So there's a large continuum of how much you could pay for information, and therefore how much effort people would put in, and then what more they might do. So sure, if you want a lot of information, then you want to get a lot of people included who have a lot of different sources of information. And then if you're willing to pay a lot, you might well be able to induce that. But if you just want a little bit of information and aren't willing to pay much, then you should be willing to compromise and just pay a little and just get a little. So, for example, we've done lab experiments where we had a session where there were only 3 traders in the market, and only one of them had any information. And then what happened is this one person who had information made a trade against a market maker, and then the final price was more informed than the initial price, and the market worked to collect information. So just getting one person who knows anything to trade is a win over your initial situation where you knew less. So, of course, and that could be pretty cheap. Now, yes, of course, if you want more information than that, then you'd like to pay more, and then you'll probably entice more people to contribute. But what you want to do is just set your price of information, and you shouldn't have to decide where it should come from. Let the suppliers decide where to get their information. You don't need them to be diverse necessarily. You don't need them to have a range of ages and genders and everything else, or nations or industries. That should be up to them to figure out what's the most productive arrangement to supply your information.
Tell me if I'm wrong, or where I'm going wrong in my thoughts, because this is what I kind of carry with me, and with the wisdom of the crowds, that, for example, the situation with Iran, now most of the liquidity in that market is coming from traders that are looking at that particular situation from American perspective. They will be Americans, let's say, whereas the Iranians might have a very different perspective on, longer term outlooks, let's say, that will influence how they act, which might not seem rational to the Americans in that case. In my mind, I was always thinking, because so much of the liquidity, 99%, maybe I'm guessing here, so apologies to, but I'm just assuming most liquidity comes from the West in those markets, and so they might not carry with them that perspective, let's say, of the Iranians that are coming from a different cultural backdrop, let's say, and how they view that situation. But you're saying that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, those people that maybe have that better information will make up for that at the end of the day.
So there's a number of factors in the cost of production here. So if somebody's already trading these markets and they already see that there's a price there, it might be pretty cheap for them to notice that they have an opinion and then to express it. And if they already have enough money to express that, then they're all set. Now, the ease of participation varies. So, for example, some people are not trading in these markets, yet they have information that's relevant. And now some trader will have to reach out to them to make a deal to get them to tell what they know. So that means it's a little more expensive to set up the process to So a trader shouldn't necessarily know themselves. They would say, who could I talk to who might know that I could compensate in some way for telling me something that I would find valuable in the market? Right. And if I know something, or I know somebody could say, man, I don't have enough money. Well, now I need capitalism to find people with capital to team with so that we can use their money to trade with, because maybe I don't have enough. And now if we think about someone in Iran, they could pile up all these obstacles. They might not know about the markets. They might not have contacts or friends who trade in them. They might not have much money. So that means we're just raising the cost of their participation, which means that there'll have to be more money, offered for their information to get this process set up where their information gets in. But if you're looking for, gee, who do I know in the market? I wonder if I know any Iranians. That would be especially attractive. Gee, if I could find somebody I know in Iran who could give me some, clues about what's happening there, that would help me a lot in trading these markets. Then traders will seek that out and try to find a way to lower the cost of getting that information. So in general, these markets are not only inducing people to go find the information wherever it is, they're inducing them to set up channels and processes that will let it be easier next time to go get the information. They'll think, if this topic's going to be around for a while, maybe it wouldn't be worth so much just for this one market at the moment to go set up a relationship. But if I see future possibilities, I might be worth investing in making contacts so that I can then have a relationship and learn many things about future topics. So it's not the fact that Iran is diverse that makes you want to contact them. It's the fact that on this topic, it seems like, that they should know stuff. Let's go talk to them. And of course, as a trader, you're especially interested in information that isn't already in the price. You don't get paid for information that's already in the price. You get paid for information that's new to the price. So that's why traders are always asking themselves, not just what do I know, but what do I know that other people don't know? And that's why I should trade. So there's this old saying in poker, for example, when you sit down at a poker table, look around and find the fool. If you don't see the fool, it's you, walk away. It's not enough to just enjoy poker and maybe be good at it. You need to be better than the other people you're playing. So similarly in these markets, it's not enough to just know something, have an opinion. You should ask, do I know more than the other people trading here?
Matt Damon and Rounders, one of the best movies ever been made. So the other side of the coin, I suppose, is the issue of insider trading that these markets can bring. That seems to be a limiting factor for prediction markets industry to really proliferate across the world, and it's certainly something that dominates media. Is that something that you see as a problem? How do you overcome the fact that there is so much insider trading happening, or is it a feature rather than a bug?
It's certainly, there are many people at the moment trying to take prediction markets down, and they've decided this is their winning thing to focus on. So that's what they're focusing on. You might have thought they would pick, gambling addiction or something like that. But no, that's not what they're doing. They're focusing on insider trading. Now, insider trading is just a response to the market. So the market just offers incentives for information, right? Any information. It says, if you got it, we're buying, come sell your information here. And then people look to say, how can I get information? And obviously people who have unusual amounts of information often correlated with people who have unusually strong connections to whatever it is the topic is. They have inside connections, inside information. So from the point of view of the function of the market to collect information, it's doing its job. Now, the question is that all we want the markets to do, or do we have other priorities in society? And I think it's okay to say information institutions, their job is to collect information, but maybe we don't just want them to go full tilt, always collecting as much information as they can, because maybe there's other priorities. So for example, people have said that on election day, it's bad if people learn about the chance of who's going to win because that discourages them from voting. So we should shut down information on elections on election day. You want to go there, then you should, set limits on what the markets can tell you on election day. But I'd say we have many other information institutions like journalism, and you should have similar policies for them. Shut down the journalists. Don't let them tell you what's happening on election day, too, if you don't want information on election day. Ordinary financial markets actually have a lot of insider trading because it's exactly the same situation there. People are rewarded for getting information in the market, and therefore people actually go look for information wherever they can find. And of course, insiders are a great source of information. So in fact, when an ordinary company with a stock price makes an announcement, that typically moves the stock price. And on average, half of that movement happens before the announcement. And half of that movement is insider trading. So there's just actually typically a lot of insider trading in ordinary financial markets. That's just the nature. So I think a lot of things people don't like about prediction markets are things they don't like about financial markets, but don't realize that they don't like about financial markets. And insider trading is probably similar. That is, people maybe don't like the idea of insider trading, and they don't like the idea in both cases, but they're just not clearly aware of how much insider trading there is in ordinary financial markets. Now, a century ago in the US, regulators created this rule about stock insider trading because they had this judgment that it was more important to have more people buying stock, and even if that came at the cost of less accurate prices. And so they said, let's limit insiders from trading on stocks. Now, I don't think that should be our general policy for all the other financial markets. I think we want more accurate prices, even if that comes at the expense of fewer trades. But you can see that the platforms like Kalshi and Polymarket, they probably prioritize more trades because that's where the revenue comes from. So they're, of course, going to be especially eager to shut down insider trading if that might discourage people from participating in their platforms. But as outsiders, I don't think I care that much about how many trades there are. I care about the accuracy of the prices. So I might not mind. Now, I'd say organizations typically have legitimate interests in keeping secrets, and we should give them tools to do so. We give them contract and maybe accusation of theft as a crime if you steal the information that you had promised to keep secret. But outsiders often also have legitimate interests in penetrating and revealing secrets. So many of our most famous journalism stories over the last decades were stories where journalists revealed secrets that organizations didn't want them to be revealed. And I would rather we sit on the middle on that, like we do with journalism. So I'm again going to argue for similar standards. So, for example, some people have proposed a bill in the U.S. Congress saying government officials should not be allowed to trade in prediction markets because they might reveal secrets that way. I'd say, fine, don't let them talk to reporters either because they might reveal secrets that way. Just have similar policies for journalism and prediction markets with respect to the issues of information that you might be worried about, including insider trading, manipulation, sabotage, etc. Hold similar policies to these different institutions.
You mentioned gambling addiction earlier as well, and this is also a second part of the other side of the coin. Currently, of course, there is this massive debate ranging in the United States whether they should be regulated by the states under gambling licenses or whether the CFTC can regulate this as a financial instrument. In your opinion, is the prediction markets in the context of today, do you see it as gambling or do you see it as trading, or does it not really matter? I suppose the semantics does matter because at the end of the day, the decision will be made, right?
The general meaning of gambling, i.e. taking chances, applies all through our lives. And we're actually pretty okay, it seems, with people gambling to take high risk, low chance, of careers in acting or music or athletics or journalism, podcasting even. People are okay with letting people make those big gambles. We're also kind of okay with people making big gambles to date people your parents would disapprove of and have reservations against. So compared to centuries ago, our world is just pretty okay with people taking a lot of big chances with a lot of big things. Now, if you think about taking chances in financial markets, if that's what you mean by gambling, well, ordinary financial markets let you make as many big, fast gambles as you could possibly want. Prediction markets don't give you any new opportunities over those kinds of gambles. What they let you do is take gambles that are more fun. So people are maybe gambling more in prediction markets because those gambles are more fun than the gambles they could make in ordinary financial markets. And then, the question is it okay with people taking risks to have fun like they do with athletics and acting and all the other things in our lives that we let people take risks for, because the usual rationale is, well, maybe the actor is going to probably fail, but he's having fun. He seems to be enjoying it, getting meaning out of it. So, let him do it. And so I might say, okay, fine. By analogous reasons, I don't mind people having fun. I do regret if there's a backlash because of this, because I might want to protect the questions that matter from the sports questions that less matter. I'm less interested in sports betting. I don't do it. It's not fun for me, but I don't mind other people having fun. But I would say that the betting on questions that matter, that should be a constitutional free speech issue. That is, we already protect protests where you go out and march in the streets and disrupt traffic and make a mess of everybody who lives nearby's day. because we say there are things you can say through protest that you can't say through letters to the editor. And that's why we protect protests, even though there's substantial social harm. So I'd say there are things you can say with bets that you can't say through protests or letters to the editor. Big things you can say, you can get a lot of information this way. So if there's a modest amount of social harm, but it's less than with protest, I'd say you should allow the markets on the questions that matter. But I don't think necessarily most sports markets would pass the threshold of questions that matter. Constitutional rules about, say, what counts as free speech have often limited it on things that judges have decided don't matter enough with respect to politics and policy. So, for example, most alcohol companies are not allowed to advertise the fact that people who drink zero alcohol are less healthy than people who drink modest amounts of alcohol. They're just not allowed to say that. Do they know how to have a free speech right to say that? Because courts have said that's too far away from politics and policy for them to have the right to say that. So, on that standard, you might say, okay, most sports contests are not close enough to politics and policy, so they wouldn't have that protection. On that, the question is it okay with people having fun and taking some, losses and risks to do so? I don't mind people having fun, but it's not my priority. My priority is the information.
Right. So that is the stance essentially, that it's not all in one bucket. Essentially, some markets have more utility, let's say, than others, which are more a clear gamble, let's say. And at the end of the day, even on the gambling side, we recognize that we all want to have fun, but there are a subset of people that are not able to control those habits, essentially. I want to also talk about decision markets or the wisdom of the crowds, how that may or may not go hand in hand with first principles thinking. Here's another thought from mine, Robin, and let me know if you agree or disagree. If you would have had a decision market for Nokia in 2007, how to produce the best next generation phone, would the wisdom of the crowds have come to the conclusion that you need a slightly better keyboard or a slightly better screen rather than the complete, first principles thinking that led to the iPhone, let's say? Because it seems to me, again, and tell me if I'm wrong, that the answer to the wisdom of the crowds when masses of people come together is generally a kind of consensus view towards what the information that is at hand, whereas the first principle thinking is original, creative thought that might not lead to the best answer from the wisdom of the crowd's perspective. So, long question short, do you think that wisdom of the crowds would have led to the iPhone being created in 2007 if there was such a market?
So first I'd say prediction markets are not wisdom of the crowds. They are just wisdom of whoever you can get to participate. And when that's not the crowd, then the crowds won't dominate the market. That is, prediction markets and financial markets in general are dominated by whoever knows most. That's not usually the crowd. Sometimes it is. These are mechanisms for getting whoever knows the most to contribute, regardless of who it is. Young or old, left or right, expert or crowd. The point is whoever knows should contribute. So now they are one way to aggregate information. They are pretty dang good. And in head-to-head comparisons, they consistently beat out other alternatives, but they're not always the best. So if I want to know what you had for breakfast, I should just ask you, what did you have for breakfast? And that'll probably be cheaper than setting up a market. The market might give me the same answer, but at a much higher cost. And then for running businesses, I'd say prediction markets aren't always best than any other way you could do information in a business. So for example, private equity seems to actually do quite well at getting people to pay really close attention to some big decisions and then making very effective, good decisions in those businesses by having decision makers who are really quite expert and have huge stakes in the business. I wouldn't claim that prediction markets could outdo that. But I'd say in most businesses, what we have is a range of decisions where some decisions outsiders are more worried about, and then it's more okay for them to have checks on decision makers in those cases. So for example, in a public company, when the firm at the initiation of the CEO says, we're going to raise more money, there's one case where they don't need shareholder approval. They've got a board approval and they can just go ahead. And there's another case where they do need shareholder approval. In the first case, on average, the price goes down 2% of the stock because speculators go, oh, this isn't so good. this guy's raising money, he doesn't necessarily need it, and this won't actually be so good for the company on average. But in the case where they do need shareholder approval, the stock price goes up 2% because investors say, well, this is a bad idea. The shareholders are veto it, and so it won't happen, so we're a little safe. So for many key organizational decisions, outside investors do not fully trust the managers to make those decisions, and they'd like to have some checks on that. And that's where Futarchy could sit in as a replacement for shareholder votes, be much more cost-effective, flexible, fast. And that's where I'd suggest using Futarchy in for-profit organizations. When you have reasons to doubt whether people are being honest with you about their recommendations and their information, then prediction markets are a great addition to get more honest answers. But they do cost you something, and they aren't necessarily going to beat the very best arrangement we can ever set up, which in the example of private equity is a very expert and well-incentivized main decision maker.
Brilliant. Robin, to start rounding off here as well, I would like to hear your thoughts where the space is heading. If you think about, if you were a betting man or a trading man, let's say, placing a trade on the future of the prediction markets space or the Futarchy space, what would you say in, say, 3 years' time? Where do you feel the space is heading towards? Do you feel like your vision is coming true in the near term?
So
how do you
I
think
started on this in the late 1980s, like almost 40 years ago. And in general, people like me are better able to see the long-term trends than short-term fluctuations. So I learned about this in the World Wide Web. So I was a part of a group trying to make the World Wide Web. And the people involved in that, had the clear vision that eventually it would happen, but they didn't know when. And then when it did happen, it didn't happen so much because of them. And they didn't actually make much money on it, because to make money on the World Wide Web, you had to know which particular companies would get traction, where, how, which is different than knowing that eventually this thing's going to happen. So similarly for prediction markets, I've had the sense of what will happen eventually and which places will be more valuable, but that's not enough to tell me which particular companies will start when, get traction when, and which product spaces when, or say which regulators will flip and change their mind, which presidential candidates or presidents will endorse for repose, which particular products. Those are just not things that I'm going to be very good at predicting. So I think there's a substantial chance of a backlash, but probably not in the next 5 years, I would guess. And so this will grow for a while, but there are other things I want, and there are people pursuing the things I want, but I don't know very well when they'll get traction and which ones. So my policy has been, for example, to help all the different firms who are trying to do things in the space related to what I'm most interested in, not picking winners or losers if I don't think I know who winners and losers. So I'm just, so again, a standard thing that what we want from these markets is, so if a reporter calls you, you often have the incentives to answer their questions, even if you don't know the answers very much, because, hey, they called you on the phone and you want to get quoted in the paper. They don't give you strong incentives to shut up when you don't know. But financial markets do. The norm that they should be pushing is, look, don't participate unless you're world class on that topic. You know something that other people in the world don't know on that topic, and then speak up. Otherwise, shut up. And that's how I want to be in these markets. I'm going to have a limited set of opinions. On the opinions that I'm world class, I will take a strong stance and bet on them and speak on them. But on opinions where I'm actually not world class, I'm not particularly better than the other people you could ask, I'm just not going to have an opinion.
Brilliant, Robin. Final question here as well. You mentioned that you advise for perhaps some of the current companies that are in the spotlight. Do you feel like they are aligned by and large with the vision that you have for the future, or do they have a different vision for where things are heading?
The current firms in the prediction market space are for-profit capitalist enterprises. I'm a professor of economics. I get what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to go for whatever revenue they can find quickly to expand their business. And that's what they're doing. I have a particular interest in these information markets, in the new product I'm hoping to create where the customer is the person with information, but I get that's a new product and that'll come when it can come. I'm going to help ventures who pursue it, but I don't resent or complain if the main firms are not. I get that they're trying to opportunistically make money. So that's what a professor of economics expects about a capitalist firm, is they are not pursuing everybody's visions of things. They are trying to make money, serving their customers in an immediate way as they can, and only focusing on the future to the extent they have a way to make profits with that, and that's what they're doing. So if I have a vision for the future, what I should do is try to entice people to pursue a vision, even if it's risky, even if it's not realized yet. And that's what, say, venture capital and new startups are for. You don't go to existing firms and complain that they aren't investing in every particular new venture you have.
Brilliant. Robin, thank you so much for your time here today. It's been great to listen in. Appreciate everything. Thank you.
Okay, take care.